So let me start by asking you a question. What are some of your all-time favorite movies or shows? And so not just thinking movies, right? I'm thinking like books that you maybe you've enjoyed, maybe even a video game story plot lines, as I know I've had some of my favorites growing up when I've been playing video games. But what are some of your favorite movies, stories, plot lines? Maybe you can go ahead in the Zoom chat. You can post in, share with your peers. What are some of your favorite movies or storylines of all time? For me, man, I'm a nerd and I'm a self-proclaimed nerd, but like for me, it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? The MCU, watching all of those superhero movies of Thor and Captain America and Civil War and Guardians of the Galaxy and Infinity Wars, right? All those movies, man, I love them so much. Why? Because they're so good, and like the movie, the superhero, right, and the journey that they go on, and going through having the backstory of who they are to there's a villain that they have to go up against, and there's conflict, and then there's resolution, and the superhero overcoming their own personal struggles or winning the day, right? We love that kind of stuff, right? We feel like we want to be like that. We want to be able to have the superpower and be the superhero in our own context, in our own world, right? We love those types of things. We can also relate to the fact that they go through struggles, right? We can relate that the story of the superhero has a context and a backstory of pain and difficulties that they've gone through to make them who they are today in the movie, right? Well, the same way we kind of have those same things, right? There are moments in our real life stories that make us ask these types of questions, right? What's the point? And why is this happening to me, right? We go through so many things in our lives where we kind of ask the question, why is this happening to me? Like, what's the point of this? And we know what we see some of our favorite movies and storylines. We see the main character asking the question, what's the point of this? Why are we doing this? Why am I going through this? Why is this happening to me? In the same way, we can ask the same questions in some of the things that happen in our life, right? Well, here's the thing. Unlike the movies, in real life, our difficult circumstances don't usually get a pretty bow tied on them as we walk through them. We watch a movie that's 2 hours long, and from the beginning to the end of the movie, there's conflict and then there's resolution. You read a book, there's conflict and then there's resolution. But in our lives, we don't feel that same thing, right? If we're being honest, we don't feel the resolution that many of these superheroes and some of these characters are receiving by the end of their story. We don't get the same thing. What we see is that our difficulties often feel random, they feel pointless, and they feel unnecessary. And I don't know if you can potentially relate to that with some of the difficulties that you've gone through. Maybe it's your parents' divorce. Maybe it's you moving to another state and not liking the life that you used to have and wishing you had it back. Maybe it's the bully that you've been wrestling with, whether online or whether it's been through school. Maybe it's that injury that you had or the injury that you kept on having, and maybe all the way to some abuse that you maybe have dealt with in your past. But maybe some of these difficulties that you've had it just feels random, it feels pointless, and it feels unnecessary. We've been going through a story, the life of Joseph, and he is totally with us, and he can understand that there's a lot of difficulties that he's faced, where he was thrown into a cistern by his brothers, betrayed by them, sold into slavery in Egypt. He was a slave in a house, but then he was set up by the master of the house. But then the wife lied, right? We looked at that last week, and how he wanted to sleep with the wife wanted to sleep with Joseph, and he said no, and then he got thrown back into prison. And so he's been through all these crazy difficulties. And if anyone is earned the right to ask, what's the point? Why is all this happening to me? Man, it's Joseph, right? Joseph's been through the ringer, and he's not done yet, actually. He's not quite out of harm's way quite yet, because he's earned the right to ask these questions. So we're going to look a little bit deeper into the life of Joseph today as we look at Genesis chapter 40. And we're going to see a little bit more of how his context unfolds and how God's going to say, okay, if you can just hold on, if you can just be a little bit more patient with me, I'm setting you up for success through your difficulties. And so before we launch into our story, I want to pose this question to you. What if God is using your painful circumstances to position you for something amazing that you haven't even imagined yet? So if you could think about your difficulties, if you can think about your pain, if you can think about the things that you wrestle with, and if you're being really honest, you're like, God, what's the point of this? Why are we dealing with this? Is there a chance that your painful circumstances are there to position you for something amazing you haven't even realized yet? But with that being said, let's dive into our text. Genesis chapter 40, verse 1, it says this: "Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with these two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined." So we have the cupbearer, we have the baker, and they ticked off the king. They got sent in the prison, the same prison that Joseph was in. After they had been in custody for some time now, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" So they had a dream. They both had a dream, separate dreams, and then they looked sad the next day. And Joseph came to them and said, "Why are you guys looking upset?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but no one is here to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, Do you not know that interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Again, so that's what happened. So Joseph said, "Hey, tell me your dreams. Let me see if I can interpret them." And so the cupbearer and the baker both shared the dreams, right? And they were both interpreted. And here's what happened. A couple days later, they both were released out of prison, and then they went back to their work. And in fact, actually, the dream interpreted for the baker was that he was actually going to get killed. And that is indeed what happened. But the cupbearer continued on, and he's serving as the king's cupbearer. And so you would think, though, that when he came out of prison, that he would share with the Pharaoh, "Hey, Pharaoh, just a heads up, bro. You got a really dope dream interpreter in prison. You should kind of get him out so he could be your right-hand dude," right? Wrong. That didn't happen. He completely forgot about him. Kind of a jerk move by him, if you ask me. But 2 years passes, actually, forgetting about Joseph, and Joseph was just stuck in prison. Well, 2 years later, here's what happens. Pharaoh has a dream in the middle of the night. He wakes up and he's just shook by this dream, has no idea what it means. He gathered his officials and he asked them, "Hey, what does this dream mean?" No one could interpret it. At this time, though, the cupbearer was still there, and he said, "Joseph is in prison. The guy who interpreted my dream, he's still in there. I need to go tell the Pharaoh." So that's what he did. He went and told the Pharaoh, and he ended up saying, "Hey, this guy named Joseph is in prison. He interpreted my dream. You should go grab him. Maybe he can interpret your dream." And that's exactly what happened. He got the Pharaoh, he got Joseph, and he brought him out of prison, and he interpreted his dream. He interpreted the dream, and Pharaoh was so impressed that he actually set him in command, second in command of all of Egypt. And he established Joseph in authority and power in a way that nobody else could do outside of the Pharaoh in Egypt, right? Because Pharaoh was the most powerful guy. And so we have Joseph, who was sold into slavery, became a slave in a house, got put into prison, and was there for 2 years. And now he is second in command of all of Egypt. Wow. What a story, right? Of God redeeming circumstances that were absolutely crazy and were very difficult, if we're being honest, right? And so when we look at this idea of what to do when you don't know what to do, and the circumstances that we're dealing with, and maybe you're personally dealing with, we look at Joseph and we hopefully can have some encouragement, right? Those difficult circumstances position Joseph and prepare him for something great, something only he could do. Joseph had the capability of interpreting dreams. Nobody else could. Joseph was the one who was doing this, but he was in prison, and the only way that he could get in position with the king is if he was in prison in the first place, right? Because he was originally with his brothers back in the land of Canaan, right? He was there with them, and his brothers sold him out into slavery, and then he was put into prison, and then he was put in the palace of the king. His difficult circumstances positioned him in a way that he was able to be set for something great, something that only God could potentially do. And it may not seem to make things better, and it may not even make sense yet, but God is in the business of taking our hurt, difficulties, and pain and redeeming them, guys. Joseph is a prime example of this. Joseph is a beautiful example of this, of taking these years of being in slavery and being in prison and then being set up for the aha moments of, wow, God, that's what you were doing. God, that's why you made me. That's why you allowed these things to happen. Because he's in the business of taking our hurts, our difficulties, and our pain and redeeming them. And so that's why we say when you don't know what to do, remember that your problems can position you for a purpose. And that might sound cheesy, and I get that it is maybe a little bit cheesy, but it's so true. Is that we have a God who takes our problems, takes our pain, takes our stories, our hurts, and he says, I want to use them, and I want to make them into something beautiful, and I want to make them into something that is redemptive, and I want to make them into something that just shows the glory of Jesus through our hurt and through our pain, because that's what Jesus is. That's what Jesus' life is about, right? He came and he died on the cross, and something gruesome and horrible and horrific, and Jesus was turning that into the most redemptive and victorious story there ever has been, right? And so if that happens with Jesus, if that's what happens in the life of Jesus and his personhood, and that God can take the most horrendous act and turn it into something beautiful, don't you think he can turn that something that's painful and difficult in your life into something beautiful? Guys, I know that it's so easy to want to take the difficulties and our pain and to hide them and to say, well, no, there's no good coming out of that. There's nothing good that could come out of quarantine and coronavirus. There's nothing good that can come out of my parents' divorce. There's nothing good that can come out of the fact that I was abused as a kid. There's nothing good that can come out of the fact that I'm getting injured over and over again, or the doctors can't find a cure for what's going on with me. But the reality is, guys, that God is in the business of being able to do that. We just have to be patient and wrestle with the process of it all. The hardest and worst things we experience aren't the end of our story. In fact, they could be something so much more. And I'm not just talking about positivity. I'm not just talking about optimism. I'm talking about hope. I'm talking about hope. I'm talking about the fact that we have a God who makes painful things beautiful, that makes horrific things redeemed and victorious. And maybe it is the thing in your story that's so difficult and you can't wrap your brain around it. You have no idea. You're kind of wondering, God, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? Why did you allow that to happen to me? And just to see, God, you are doing something beautiful, and God, and I'm going to trust you. And I know it makes sense, and sometimes I don't want to trust you, but I'm going to. The way Joseph did, we ought to do as well. I'm not saying it's easy, guys. I'm saying it's necessary, though. So here's how we can get a bigger perspective, right, as we move forward. Remember that no one else has your life story, right? We are all dealing with the coronavirus. That's okay. We get that. We're hoping that we're knowing that God's going to make something beautiful and redemptive out of this season. That's so true. But your particular story, your journey that you've gone through in life, nobody else has. Your story, God wants to use. He wants to use as a voice piece to proclaim Jesus in your sphere of influence over time, that you be willing to say, yeah, I want to take the scars that I have, the pain that I have, and I want them to let Jesus speak through them. And Satan wants nothing more than the opposite of that. He wants you to feel like you can do nothing but just sit in silence and isolation and fear that, yeah, you won't be accepted if you share your story. Yeah, no one's going to really approve of what's going on in your life. You know what? That thing that happened, yeah, just sit down and shut up. That didn't actually happen, right? Satan wants to corral your mind, shroud your brain with discouragements and lies, insecurities, and make you feel like your story doesn't matter. Guys, your story matters. And you've been positioned for a purpose, and maybe that purpose hasn't been established clearly to you yet, but I promise you, whatever you've gone through in your past is going to position you for something great in the future. And God wants to use it. And he just was saying, would you allow me to speak through your life, speak through the brokenness, speak through the hurt, speak through the difficulties, let Jesus' glory shine through your life. So remember that nobody else has your life story. Secondly, remember this, that your story can interact with others. You can impact people that you didn't realize could. The story that you had that you think is so unique to you, maybe somebody else has the same story that you can go and encourage, and you can go and share and be Jesus to them, and share some of that idea that there is hope, and that there is a purpose to what you're going through. You just have to hold out. You just have to hold out and trust God and not stop worshiping God, not stop trusting God, even amidst the pain. And you can be real. You can be real and say, yeah, this hurts. Yeah, this is painful, but God is good. But God is working all things together for the good of those who love whom have been called according to his purposes, to conform and to transform you more into the image of Jesus. That's what it's all about, guys. And then thirdly, just remember that your pain isn't pointless. Your pain isn't pointless. There's something that God's doing, guys. Hold on. Don't quit. Don't capitulate to despair. Don't give up. Know that God's doing something in your life. And the pain is not pointless. And remember this, God takes impossibly bad situations and uses them to create unimaginably good ones down the road. We can trust this. If we can just hold on to this, God's going to do something beautiful. God's going to do something beautiful through your life. He's going to do something beautiful through my life. But it's only God who's going to be able to do it. And so when you don't know what to do, just remember that your problems can position you for a purpose. What's the purpose? Search it. Search the scriptures. Pray. Have accountability. Let people speak into your life. What will it look like for you to see your problems positioning you for a purpose of gospel advancement? What would that look like? Thanks for joining us tonight.